Today we're going to be talking about testing, and testing is quite simply one of the most important things that we need to factor in when we're starting to run online campaigns. Testing is important simply because with all of these different ways of doing the same thing, with different adverts and different images and different copies and different captions and different placements and different campaign objectives, sometimes you can be in a situation where you're not quite sure what the best route to your goal is going to be. For example, what image is going to work best to drive traffic to your website, or which video is going to give you the most engagement and the most viewer retention. Sometimes it's really hard to tell, but making sure you're using the right kind of objective with the best performing advert and the best performing audience is literally the difference between spending money effectively or spending money ineffectively. Now, ineffective use of budget is essentially wasted budget, so we need to avoid it at all costs. The idea of testing is quite simple. If we think of these different campaign objectives and ad sets and audiences as kind of different recipes for trying to get the desired goal, testing just says, well, why don't we spend a small amount of money testing these different recipes to see which one is the most effective before we start deploying our whole budget into one or the other. This is where split testing comes into play. Now, you might remember us glossing over this earlier in the series, but I'm going to dive into a split testing example for you right now to show you exactly how it works. So if we look at our ads manager, I want to use a very basic example of a traffic campaign. Now, let's say quite simply that we want to drive some traffic to our website and we want to try and figure out which of two images is going to be the one that's most conducive to getting traffic to our website. That's exactly the sort of situation where an A/B split test can be really powerful. Now, you remember if we scroll down when we look at a traffic campaign, so let's just call this, for example, traffic split test. You're going to have the option to have a split test on or off. Now, if we decide to do an A/B split test, what we can do is we can test different variables. And all we mean by variables is what is the thing that's going to change in these two different scenarios. For example, if the variable was the creative, that would mean that you're going to change something to do with your advert. This could be, for example, out of image A and image B, which one is going to give me the most clicks to my website? Alternatively, this could be about delivery optimization. Now, you're going to remember that we have different ways of optimizing adverts when it comes to things like traffic or reach, for example. So throwing back to an earlier lesson, you might remember that with a traffic campaign, you might optimize for link clicks, which just says, I want as many people to click this as possible. Or you might optimize for landing page views, which is more about people who click the link but then actually go to load up the page. So you might say, well, if I'm trying to drive traffic to my website to read a blog, for example, what's better? Is it better to optimize for link clicks, or is it better to optimize for landing page views? That's exactly where the delivery optimization tests come into play. You know, going down to audience, we can also choose to say, you know what, our creative is going to be the same. Let's say that you've decided on the advert that performs best, but now you want to say, well, which group of people does this advert resonate the most with? Considering my campaign objective, you know, is this advert going to perform better in group A or better in group B? For example, let's say you take group A of people who are 18 to 35 and you take group B of people who are 35 to 60 and you say, I want to put my advert in front of these different audiences to see which audience reacts best to the message I'm putting in front of them. And going down to the bottom here, we have placement, which is all about saying, let's assume that our audience stays the same, that the advert stays the same, but I want to see what's the best placement, i.e. where's the best place to display this advert? Is it Instagram feeds? Is it Facebook stories? Is it in articles? Is it in the audience network? This is where the A/B split test about placement comes into play. You want to find out where is the best place to show your advert to a fixed audience with a fixed creative. So this is basically like saying to Facebook, hey, can you tell me which one of these different factors between my audience or my creative or my optimization or my placement, which one is going to give me my goal at a cheaper price? Which one is going to complete my objective in the best possible way? Let's look at a really simple example. Let's say that I want to drive people to my website and I have two different images and I want to know which image is going to perform the best. I'm going to choose a variable for the creative. Now, there's two things that I want to mention really quickly. An A/B test doesn't just have to have two different variables. It doesn't necessarily have to say I have image A and image B, because as you're about to see, we could easily have image C and image D and image E all the way up to image Z. The whole point is you can test many different creatives. Doesn't always have to be two. The same is said for audience and the same is said for placements and optimizations. Another thing that's important to mention is before you go into split testing, have a little bit of a think about what you're trying to do. As you've already seen, you can end up having different ad sets with different creatives and different buttons and different calls to action and different audiences and different optimizations. It's quite important to try to boil everything down to saying what's the most important thing I'm trying to test, and try to make A/B tests really around one or maybe two different variables. So for example, maybe you want to test a different audience, then do an A/B test between a couple of different audiences. Maybe you want to test placement, so do it between some placements. Don't open Pandora's box by having 100 different tests all running simultaneously, because pretty soon you're not going to be able to see the wood for the trees, because you're going to have so many tests, it's not going to give you a clear understanding of what's working and what's not. So as we go into actually building an A/B split test, in this example that I'm giving, where we're trying to find out what image is going to work best between image A or image B, I'm going to choose creative and we go through to making the ad sets. Now, I'm driving traffic to a website, which is fine, and just again, we can see the choice of variables here, and I'm going to show you how some of these change the creation of the ad set in a second. But as we've chosen creative, it's important to realize that our audience is going to stay the same. We're not going to have an option to make multiple audiences. The reason why is because the change happens at the ad level. Nothing's changing within the ad set because our audience is staying the same and our placements are staying the same. So you can imagine that the place I would put my two different adverts would be in the ad level. And you can actually see here on the left-hand tab that I have the options for ad A and ad B. And I'll show you that in 1 second. Before we do, let's just change the variable, for example, to delivery optimization. You're going to see that all of a sudden I have different options of how I would want to potentially optimize my advert. For example, my first ad set might be optimized for landing page views, whilst my second ad set might be optimized for link clicks, for example. If I go to changing the variable to audience, naturally this would mean that we're now going to make more than one audience to test to see which audience is working the best. So you can see that as soon as I've done that, we have different audiences that we can build. So now I might go ahead and create one audience for ad set A and create a second audience for ad set B. Now, as I said earlier, you can always go ahead and test another ad set, which means that you could go and make a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and on. You can make as many audiences as you want to. If we go to the placement, we're now going to have the option to choose all of the different placements that we might want in ad set A. For example, maybe in ad set A, we just want to show the advert on Instagram. And in ad set B, we want to show all of the adverts on Facebook, as a simple example. And we might then even want to go and make an ad set C, which has automatic placements on. So this is basically saying, hey, Facebook, what's going to be the most effective set of placements between just marketing on Facebook, just marketing on Instagram, or maybe marketing across the whole board? So just to go one step further on this point is when it comes to an accurate split test, what Facebook's going to do is it's going to make sure that it splits these groups up. And it's going to make sure that there's no crossover. The whole idea is you don't want one person seeing two different versions of the same advert. So Facebook's going to go ahead and deliver this to unique people in each group, and it's going to split them randomly. And as it does that more and more, it's going to deduce in these different groups what the behavior is. Which group is performing the best, which group's performing the worst. That's the basic idea of what a split test is doing. So let's just go back to our original idea of using the split test for a creative. So my audience is going to stay the same, and just to breeze through this lesson, I'm just going to leave it wide across the United Kingdom, and I'm going to leave automatic placements on. We're going to optimize for landing page views, and let's say that we start to come down to the budget. Now you're going to notice something a little bit different here. Where we are looking at the A/B test budget and schedule, we now have something new turning up. We have this concept called estimated test power. The way to think about this is, how do we actually get a good test? And by a good test, I mean a test that actually accurately predicts which one of these two different pictures is working. Let's think about our image example. We have image A, we have image B. If we sit around a table with 5 of our friends and we say, which image do you prefer? It's quite possible that there might be some biases in this source audience of 5 people. Maybe 4 out of 5 of them like image A. And you've got to start thinking, well, does that mean that we should now start putting all of our money into image A? And that just because 80% of the room liked image A, is that going to mean that 80% is going to be the same across the whole country? No, of course it's not, because that source audience is far too small to make an accurate prediction. This makes a lot of sense because if we went and asked 100 people, the results would be very, very different. They'd be more accurate. Then all of a sudden you have 100 people and you have a percentage weighted on how many people out of 100 prefer these images as opposed to how many people out of 5. So quite quickly we understand that the more people we ask, the more accurate our test becomes when it comes to predicting the behaviors of the rest of the world. And that is exactly what this concept of the estimated test power means. If I go and spend £1 a day over 4 days, it's going to hit such a small amount of people that it's not going to be an accurate test. And you can see here it says the estimated test power is less than 60%. This is Facebook's way of saying you can do this, but the test results aren't really going to deduce much about which one of your adverts is performing best. For example, if we go right up and we decide to spend £1,000 a day over 4 days, that's such a massive source audience, and the amount of feedback is so big that Facebook's going to come back and say, statistically speaking, if you were to spend £1,000 across 4 days, we're 95% sure that the image that wins the split test is absolutely the best performing image. So we don't need to dive into the statistics of exactly how this stuff is calculated, but that is essentially what this little percentage means. So let's say, for example, I go ahead and I spend £50 across a week, and I know that I'm going to get a pretty decent test result. It's going to be 86% accurate. And moving on to where we create the ad, as we've guessed before, this is the place where we're going to put different adverts. We're going to be able to make an ad A and an ad B, and if we want to, an ad C and a D and an E. So here is ad A, and we're fairly familiar at this point with how to build an ad. But the thing to notice is that at the bottom here, we have a new option, which is continue to ad B. And again, if we just have a look on the left here, we can see that now we don't just have one ad, we have 2, and we can choose to add more if we want to. So let me just fast forward through this process a little bit, because I'm going to go ahead and add some media, and I'm going to bring in my first advert, which is this little picture of a robot here, and I'm going to say, I'd like you to read my blog. Obviously, I don't recommend you make adverts like this, but this is purely to show you the mechanics of how it works. My headline is going to be, let's say, top 5 ways to promote your business. And let's say, click the button to read this great article. It's important at this point that we remember we are testing the creative, we're testing the image. And like I said before, we want to try and simplify our tests as best possible. Now, every single different variable that you see here, for example, the primary text or the headline or the description, all of these are further variables that you can test. For example, maybe you say, well, I've tested what picture works the best, and I know that, so I'm going to use the same picture, but now I want to test a different headline or test a different call to action button. Instead of using learn more, maybe you want to use book now or buy now. It's important to understand that every single one of these variables is testable. My personal advice is that we don't test many different variables all at the same time, but it's important that you know that you can test anything that you want to. So moving down to the website URL, I'm going to go ahead and put transparentdigitalservices.com. robotictraffic.com, and I'm going to use learn more as a call to action. So there you go. There is our first advert. It's a terrible advert, of course. It just says, I'd like you to read my blog, with not much information and a picture of a robot. But the point being is, now as we finish this off, we're going to go continue to ad B. So this opens a new window to start making ad B, our second advert, which is where we would like to test the second image. Noticeably, it's going to populate all of the stuff from advert A. So it's just going to copy it all over, and then you can go and change the variable that you want to change, whatever that is. In this example, it's going to be the image. So I'm going to go and change image. And now I'm going to put this brand new image in, and there we go. We have exactly the same advert with exactly the same call to action and the same description. The only difference is now the image is different. And as we go through the rest of the process, we can confirm that. And there we go. There is our split test that is rendering and populating. It's in draft at the moment, and soon it's going to go in review. So there we go. That is how we make an A/B split test. And now you know how to essentially test anything. You can test between which video is going to perform the best. You might decide to choose different copies, different creatives, different audiences, whatever you can think of at this point. So once a split test has run its course, you're going to get the result. You are going to get a very clear email that will say what the winner was. So the idea behind these split tests is, in this example, once 7 days has passed and once we have spent our budget, we're going to get an email and it will tell us quite simply whether image A or image B was the best when it came to driving traffic to the website. Now, from that point forward, we might decide to test the winner against other ideas of ads we have. We might want to start to test different variables. But the point being is, this A/B split test is the method in which we can start to narrow down of many, many different options of adverts and audiences and campaign optimizations. We can start to narrow down what the best choice for what we're trying to do is. Now, like always, there aren't hard and fast rules, and this is all about your creativity in thinking, how do I want to communicate my brand? And once you've done that, of the different ways I can communicate my brand, let's test to see which one is the most effective. So that's the idea of a split test. But what about the campaigns day to day that you're running? What happens when you start to want to diagnose problems that are happening when you're trying to execute a campaign? We've already considered the strategy about putting different objectives in a chain to walk a user through the journey of discovering your brand to finally becoming a purchaser. But what happens if there's areas in the middle of this strategy where things could be improved? You know, how do you actually start to look and figure out what things are working and what things aren't? This is where the lesson on insights becomes really, really important, because I don't want to give you hard and fast rules about things that are working and things that aren't. I'll give you an example. Frequency is, as you know, the measure of how many people have seen your advert on average. There's a lot of people that might say there's clear-cut rules with frequency, i.e. you never want to have a frequency of 5. You know, you don't want to hit someone 5 times with the same advert. But with any insight, there's no hard and fast rules. For example, maybe you are launching a brand new product, or maybe you have a flash sale going on, or maybe you have something that requires a really intense amount of frequency because you need to expose this very, very quickly in a very short amount of time. That might be a situation that warrants a very high frequency. Maybe you are just introducing a brand to a brand new audience and you don't want to be slamming them 3 times a day with your message because it's going to spam their news feeds and it's going to be really counterproductive to what you're trying to do with your strategy. So that's where a very low frequency might make more sense. The point being is, as we go through the lists of all these different insights that you can observe, you need to be the one to think and decide what's good and what's bad. Do you want a high frequency? Do you want a low frequency? Are you trying to just expose your brand to as many people as possible? Or are you trying to get a small amount of people to have a very high brand retention? This is really why understanding the insights is the first port of call when we're trying to deduce where problems could be and how we might be able to improve things. I want to show you an example of how to think about this when it comes to a video view campaign. Looking at my screen here, I have selected all of the video view campaigns that have been running across a particular account in the last year. And we can see that of all of these video view campaigns, we might want to ask, well, which one's the most effective? Which one is the one that actually captivates people the most? Which one's the one that gives us the most engagement? And a very handy trick that I want to show you is the ability to export table data. So you're going to remember from insights that you can customize columns and you can choose which of these insights you would like to display at any one time. For example, here with all of these different video view campaigns, I've got the results and I've got, importantly, the number of unique people who have seen it. And I've got a couple of interesting things. For example, the video average playtime, or how many comments and engagements have happened on each one of these campaigns. So when it comes to observing and, in a way, testing which one is doing the best, there's different ways to ask that question. You might say, well, of all of these videos, what is the longest average view time? I can clearly see that if I organize this by video average playtime, I have an answer. I know that this is the advert that is the best. But does that actually mean it's the best? For example, maybe I want to go and see, well, which video gave me the most comments? Well, now I have a completely different answer. Now, do I have a different answer because this campaign had more money spent on it? So even though the average view rate on the other video was higher, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a better video. So I need to really think, well, how do I want to define what the best advert is first? Because depending on what question you ask, you're going to have different adverts that are going to come to the top. For example, we will have a completely different result, I'm sure, if I judge things by what videos were played the most at 50%. Well, there we go. We have a completely different result. So what happens when we're in this situation? Because no doubt you'll find yourself in this position at some point when you're looking at doing the most effective thing for your business, whatever your business is, and whether this is a video view campaign or a traffic campaign or a conversion campaign. What you can do is you can decide what insights you want to observe, and you can go and export them into a spreadsheet. So you click this button here, which is exporting the table data. And then you can export it as a CSV, and there you go. This is what it looks like. So here are my different campaigns. Here are all of the columns that I just saw in my business manager. So a good little tip that's worth considering is quite often different campaigns have had different amounts of money spent on them. For example, if you have one video view campaign that's had £100 spent on it and one that spent £1,000 in it, chances are the one that's had £1,000 is going to have more video views and more post engagement. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's better than the first one. It just means that more money's been spent on it, more people have seen it, and more people have engaged in it. So I'd go through the process of comparing a particular result when you consider the amount of people that have been reached. I'll show you exactly what I mean here. Let's say we have all of these different videos and we know that different amounts of money have been spent on each one because we have completely different reach figures. Now, I might decide to say, I would like to know for every 1,000 people, how many of them watched 75% of the video. So now all of a sudden, we're kind of evening the playing field and saying, well, let's take 1,000 people of each one of these ad sets on average and see which one had the higher viewer retention. So using a bit of maths here, if I were to take all of the people who have watched 75% of the video and divide that by the number of people that were reached with that campaign, I would then have a ratio or a percentage. And for any Excel or numbers users, I've just made sure that the cell is formatted for percentage there, because now I know that for this specific video, around about 2.55% of people that were reached went through to watch 75%. So if I just go and copy that now across all of the other campaigns, now I have a really good insight about which video is giving me the longest viewer retention. Now that might be a really good metric for knowing which one of the videos is working the best. I can see here that 2.55 is my best result for viewer retention, which means that this campaign, this one called Falling, is clearly the winner. That's the one that is getting me the most viewer retention. But I could do something else. I might decide to say, well, let's have a look at the post engagements. And interestingly, I actually get a very similar result, which means that 70% of the people that saw this particular video ad engaged with it. Now, there are two very clear indicators that this advert is the one that is absolutely performing the best, but it's not necessarily that obvious unless we go to this level of really diagnosing the facts and really looking at the numbers. So that's just a little bit of an insight into how far you can really go into understanding your data to diagnose exactly what's happening when you really want to figure out of many different campaigns or many different ad sets which one is actually performing the best. Now, there are a few things to watch out for. You might not necessarily be aware of this, but online there's all sorts of robotic traffic that happens. Especially in some corners of the world where things like click farms are run. If you look at Asia or if you look at South America, these are typical regions where there's a lot of smart stuff that happens when it comes to fake robotic traffic. So if we're not careful about choosing the right audiences in the right locations that are conducive to us growing our business, we might end up optimizing our results for the cheapest places. Let's say you are a baker in Paris, for example. You'd want to make sure that you are targeting location specific. You'd want to make sure that you're trying different audiences within your location. If, for example, you were just testing to see what would be the cheapest traffic, you might find that marketing internationally, you're going to get traffic for next to nothing from Mexico, for example, which obviously doesn't make sense to your business. The reason why I'm flagging this up is do be careful that it's not all about the cheapest result for your objective. It's not always about saying, how do I get the cheapest video view, the cheapest traffic, the cheapest reach, the cheapest set of impressions. It's not always about that. You always have to bring it back to considering what is the objective that is most conducive to your business growing. So I really, really hope that makes sense. And whenever it comes to observing the data that you can see in your business manager, whenever it comes to split testing, you always have got to go back to your 3 key principles. You've always got to be thinking, are these results conducive to my business growing? Just because you have millions of link clicks to your website, does that mean that people are signing up to your mailing list? Does it mean that people are purchasing from you? Because if it doesn't, you've got to remember that there's bigger things to consider when it comes to, is your ad spend giving you the return on investment that you need? So I'm going to round up this lesson now to talk very briefly about pixels and what they are and what they do, because this is also quite important when it comes to testing, especially for people who are selling things online, but also for people who might be driving traffic to a website. If we go to Ads Manager, you're going to see something called Events Manager. And if you click on that button, you're going to see the different data sources that are available. And what I mean by data sources is pixels. Now, pixels are simply a little bit of code that sit on a website, and they're like little beacons that announce when something has happened. For example, you could have a pixel on a web page so that if someone sees an advert, clicks on it and then goes to the web page, the pixel might fire and it might say there has been a visitor on this page. And if you were to go into your ads manager and have a look at the different insights that would show up, a page view would show up as 1, and it would say there has been 1 page view registered. Now, that page view can only register if you have a pixel on the web page, because otherwise, how would Facebook know? That's where the Facebook pixel comes into play. Now, the Facebook pixel kind of looks like this. You have different events, and by events, this could be a page view or someone that's viewed content, someone that's gone to check out or maybe even purchase something. And you can see this thing here, which is a pixel ID, which is a unique identifier to that Facebook pixel, which means that it's yours and no one else's. This means that you're getting the data from your ads and no one else's ads. We're not going to dive into how to install pixels in this course, but when you go to make a pixel in the Events Manager in Facebook, there are developer instructions that you could email to someone who might be building your website. As well as that, for any people using other apps, whether it's MailChimp or Shopify, there are usually places within the settings of those third-party apps where you can actually just copy and paste your Facebook pixel ID. So for anyone out there running an e-commerce store on Shopify, you can go into your Shopify settings, you can paste your Facebook pixel ID, and everything's just going to work fluidly because they integrate automatically. This means that if someone goes to your store, they go and buy products, you're going to be able to get all of that information into your ads manager. And I want to show you an example of exactly what that looks like. This is the store of an artist that I'm working with. And it's interesting because this is showing us results for a conversion campaign. And we haven't necessarily had a look at that in this course. So I want you to imagine that this is someone who's selling merchandise on a store and they have their pixel ID in Shopify. So every action that's made, we can track the user behavior with a pixel. Now, this is how it starts to show. Straight away, you're going to notice that in the results column, we now have this new metric, which is purchases. This actually shows us now exactly how many purchases have been made from this campaign. This shows us how many website purchases, it shows how many people have added their payment info, adds to carts, and you get the idea, checkouts initiated and content views. And as I just go into the ad sets here, we can see all of these different types of ad sets that we are testing. For example, we might say, well, we want to place this on Facebook and we want to put this in front of anyone that's engaged in the last 30 days or people who have visited the website. And as we go and look at all of these different ad sets, you can imagine that we're using the relevant custom audiences and we are using the right pixel and we're optimizing for purchases, and it all kind of makes sense. We've been through that before when it comes to how to create an advert. But I just want to show you that at this point when we have pixel tracking, we can start to understand which adverts are giving us the best results. We can clearly see here that we have a pretty strong winner for this advert, which is going to have a specific set of targeting, a specific set of optimizations, and a specific set of placements. What this means is if we do have pixels installed when it comes to purchases, it doesn't really matter how many people have watched this video, what the engagement rate per 1,000 people is. With pixels, we have this really good feedback loop of saying this is the advert that is generating the most amount of purchases. And importantly, we can scroll all the way over to our purchase return on ad spend. Now, if you remember, this is basically just saying for every $1 you've spent, how many dollars comes back? You know, if you spend €2 and you sell €2 worth of goods, your return on ad spend is going to be 1. And we can see here that we're running very profitable campaigns because our return on ad spend is much higher than 1. For example, for every £1 we have spent on this particular advert, we've generated £55.14. And we can quite clearly see that although this advert might have sold the most, this one's the one that's giving us the highest return on ad spend. And we can actually see the purchase amount. If I just go ahead and customize the columns real quick, I should also be able to put the value of the purchases so you can actually see exactly how much has been spent on the website. And this is a really nice way to round up the concept of testing because yes, insights are going to give you a really, really good idea of what campaigns are working, what video and what ads are giving you the best results. But really, it does come down to pixel tracking when it comes to e-commerce. When you're actually selling things, there's kind of no better way of testing which one's working. As we can see here, we might want to go ahead and turn off the ads that are performing badly and double down budget on the ads that are working really, really well. So I hope that sets the tone for how we want to think about testing. And now I hope you're in a position to go through and start looking at your insights in your campaigns and really take that eagle-eye view to see what campaigns are working well, what campaigns are working badly, and see where you can improve things like your creative or your placements through split testing. So that's everything for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one.